Greetings one and all, J2100 here. Another birthday of mine is here and yay, I guess? I don't know, once you leave childhood, they start to feel less special. Anyways, one question I've been asked over and over throughout the years is how to make a Bionicle stop motion. Don't get me wrong, I want to help people improve their craft and become really good biotubers. That being said, I'm sometimes really busy when I get these questions, and when you're asked a similar question so many times, it can get quite tiring. So that's what this video is for, to explain how I make my stop motion videos and give you tips you could all consider, so I don't have to repeat myself a dozen more times in the future. Now, let me be clear, this is not an end-all be-all on how to make the best Bionicle stop motions. There are people in this community much better at this craft than I am, and we all have our own methods. I would honestly also gather advice from other people to get their own perspectives. This video is just showing mine to those who are just starting, looking for a way to start, or simply want some advice on improvement. I think the first thing you need to keep in mind when entering this hobby is the cost of it. There are ways you can make videos on a smaller budget, which I will go over, but chances are, one way or another, you're going to need to fork over a bit of cash, especially if you want to get better equipment for the future. I personally wouldn't recommend buying all the best stuff at once though, especially if you're first starting out. Learn the basics of the craft, and if you want to continue before upgrading to make your videos better. The last thing I want is to see you waste all your money on a hobby you may not even end up liking. Do keep in mind that for all your tools, there are plenty of options, so I recommend doing your own research to see what's best for your abilities and budget. There are some basic things you will need to make your stop motion. Figures, whether they be Bionicle or otherwise, anything to write a script with, a camera, and a computer with editing software. Your figures are the most basic thing to explain. Use what you have, or if you want specific sets and or pieces for mocks, there are plenty of websites like eBay and Bricklink for that. The tools for script writing are pretty simple to explain too. In my first years of YouTube, I used a pencil and paper, but found that Microsoft Word and Google Docs are much easier to edit and make alterations. I recommend Google Docs more, as if you know someone else with access to the same program, it's really easy to send it to them to review and alter, and if you have multiple people voicing your characters, I find sending a link to them easier than just sending an entire Word document. For cameras, you have a few options. I know a lot of people start using their phone cameras for stop motion, which, if you can't afford a nice camera, is probably your best option for those starting out. I also know there are apps to do stop motion, though I wouldn't really know anything about that. You'll want to ask around for more information. I know when I first started out, I used my mother's old Kodak camera, so if you know any family or friends that would be willing to let you borrow or keep their camera, that's another good money-saving method. If you do have the cash though, I would recommend a regular camera over a phone camera, as they tend to have more options and often better quality. For your starting camera, try to look for something under $100. That seems like a decent price range to begin with. When you get more experience, then you may want to get something more costly. As recommended by my sister's boyfriend Bobby, I've been using the Canon Rebel T6 for a while now. One important element I think a good camera should have is to manually change your focus. I remember with my mother's old Kodak, it would autofocus, so the target of my photo would often unintentionally become blurry. Also, with manual focus, you can do neat filmmaking tricks like this. If your camera has the option to have a countdown before taking the picture, I'll take full advantage of that. I often notice with my Kodak, whenever I hit the button to take the picture, the camera would shift, making the pictures more uneven than they should be. The countdown also allows you to back away from your camera and make sure everything is more consistent. Also, one last thing, remove the flash! It makes your pictures look so much worse. For stop motion, the camera needs to be able to stay still, or else you get stuff like this. Yeah. So, you'll need a stand. Now, for the longest time, I used a stack of books and video game cases to make my own stands. It's not the most stable thing, but for those starting out, it's not a bad option, though you'll want an official stand at some point. While you may want a regular tall camera stand, one you will often see in photo shoots and school picture day, that will only be so useful for Bionicles and other action figures. I usually use this stand for really high angles and when my characters are flying. This one was recommended to me by the Shadowed 11, the PhotoPro UFO Basic. Not only is it one of the cheapest items I'll be talking about, but the flexible legs make it really useful for taking specific angles and shots. If you're using your phone, there are options for that too. Water warning though, you may want to check and make sure these stands are compatible with the camera you are working with. Do your research ahead of time. I'll get into the specifics of filming later, but for now, let's discuss editing software. Whether you're using your own computer or using your parents', there should be built-in editing software into your computer, and if there isn't, you should be able to download it. Macs have iMovie, while Windows have Windows Movie Maker. If you take anything from this video, let it be this. Find another editing software as soon as possible, especially if you're on Windows. I can't speak for iMovie, but Windows Movie Maker itself has not been updated over half a decade, and in my last few years of using it, it became really daggone fiddly and buggy. Though, if you really don't have the money, you can technically still use them. Though if you can find something that's relatively inexpensive, go for that instead. Once you get the money and experience, you may want to find something a bit better. It took me several years before I upgraded.
Why I didn't upgrade sooner is a mystery.
There are plenty of editors out there, but the two most common editing softwares I see being used is Sony Vegas for Windows and Premiere Pro for both Windows and Mac. Vegas has a lot more options and products than I thought, which includes one-time payments and subscriptions depending on what you want to get. There are multiple versions of Vegas, including older options that are cheaper, so you can consider that. I do remember getting a copy of Vegas really cheap for your Humble Bundle a few years back, so if something like that comes up again, I take advantage of that. Premiere Pro, however, like most Adobe software, will require a subscription. Whether or not you want to pay for a subscription will depend on how often you plan to edit and how much you're willing to spend, but there is another option. Premiere Elements is a single payment of about $100, but at the cost of player features. Still, it's a pretty good testing ground, and if you want those extra features after you've got experience with the Nerf version, you can get that upgrade. You can also get a bundle with Photoshop Elements, another Nerf version of a popular software, for about $150. Do your research and try to find out which software is the best for you, both in terms of functions and what you're willing to spend. Do keep in mind that some editors only work for specific operating systems. Going back to Photoshop a bit, it's now time to consider any additional software and tools you may want. Now, I do think these are important, but depending on what you're trying to make, they aren't completely necessary. Any sort of image editing software is good if you want to make thumbnails, and in my case, do stuff like adding specific effects, such as my exaggerated eyes. It's also useful if you want to edit out something. As an example, let's say I'm throwing a shield a la Captain America. I can take two pictures of it, one without my hand and shield and one with them. I can combine both, but edit out my hand. For those starting out, Paint on It is a free option, if not limited in what you can do. Still, not a bad tool for beginners. Once you decide to upgrade, Photoshop Pro and its Elements counterpart are the most common picks. Once again, Elements is limited, but you only have to pay once, while Pro is subscription-based. For those on a budget and don't want to pay a subscription, Elements will still give you a lot of options. If you want vocals, you want a microphone and audio recording software. For the love of everything that's good and holy, stay away from computer microphones. Anyone will tell you that there is a massive difference in quality. For example, this is how I sound with my microphone.
And this is crap.
I don't have much experience with these myself, but if you got yourself a headset with a microphone for online gaming, that's a decent option to start out with. If you want a regular microphone though, your best pick, I say at least, is a Blue Snowball, which you can snag for about $40 to $60 on Amazon. You'll also want a pop filter to make your audio a bit cleaner and avoid any annoying pops in your audio, especially with words that start with P. Word of advice though, put the filter a bit away from the microphone itself, or else you'll still get those annoying pops. If you want something a bit better, there is a Blue Yeti, whose price seems to vary, and there are plenty of other microphones and audio options if you have the cash to spare. You also need software to record and edit your audio. There is Adobe Audition, but Audacity is the best bang for your buck. Being free should be a red flag, but no joke, this is a great program with a lot of options. Another thing you'll want is something to keep your figure standing and or sliding around. I recommend using any sort of putty you can use to keep posters on your wall, or anything similar. You should be able to find these at your local Walmart and Target, but even if you can't, you can get them for relatively cheap on Amazon or eBay. Put as much as you want on the feet. It ain't foolproof, but it's something. You can also use green screens and light effects for your videos, but I don't have much experience with these, so you have to ask others about that. If you're just starting out, it's probably best to skip over these and save them for when you have more money and experience. Considering all the pictures you'll be taking and the possible library of background music and sound effects you'll be amassing over time, you may want to think about getting a flash drive or external hard drive. The former tends to be cheaper, so I say start with that, but the latter, while costly, can store so much data. And if your computer is already crowded with programs, games, and the like, having something for extra storage will do you wonders. So those were the tools, but now let's get more specific about the process of making a video. First off is the script. Without one, you're early me. Actually, even with the script, early me was still anyways. Those without much experience with scripting may think it's just writing what the characters will say, but there's more to that. One way to see your script is the guidelines of how your video will end up. What will I animate these characters doing? What will my voice actor say? What types of emotions are these lines supposed to be implying? Where will this scene take place? Will I need any external items? Will I need to buy these items myself? Things like that. It's true that you can make changes later after you've made your script if you want to improve things, and in the case of voice acting, you can do some ad-lib, but as a whole, I would recommend adding in a lot of details so you can know what to do without becoming lost later. That way, I know to prepare to do it. How much you want to add is up to you, but at the very least, I recommend writing what actions the characters are performing, what they are saying, and what types of emotions these characters are expressing when saying said lines. The last one is especially necessary if you have other people doing voices for you. You may know how the characters are supposed to sound, but your friend may most likely not. Speaking of which, I personally recommend highlighting any audio said by another voice actor in a particular color, one for each of their characters if possible. This will make it easier for them to find the lines they need to do, and less of a chance of them skipping over something by accident. I recommend looking at official scripts from movies and TV shows to get a better idea of what to look for when writing your own. After writing your script, look over again for any mistakes, perhaps even once more. I even recommend getting at least one friend to look over it. Another pair of eyes can help look over any issues you may have not even considered. Do keep in mind that you don't have to follow all of their criticisms. Sometimes said criticism will actually make your video weaker, or it's something that's only an issue for a small select group of people, but at least consider it. Once you have your script ready, make sure you have the necessary items, and I don't just mean the equipment I brought up earlier. What I mean specifically are props. For example, in my 2019 Christmas video, during one of the segments, I need cookies for Santa, so I bought some Oreos from the store. Plus, I hadn't had any in a while, so I thought I could use the leftovers in my stomach. Sue me. Now, it is possible to get by using just what you have on hand, but if you need very specific items, especially for more elaborate sets like Larnu Works and ThatchMac do, you're gonna need to put in the effort to get and make those props. Now you can finally start filming. Some creators try to make their own sets with their own light sources, as, let's face it, natural light can be extremely finicky, especially if you're making scenes that can take a while. For example, in this scene I did from 2013, notice how the sun starts out relatively bright, then it becomes night over time. You really want to avoid stuff like this. If you don't have access to lighting equipment and a set, the best thing I can recommend is to only film during that one part of the day. For example, when I animated Lucario vs. Zelkron, I did it mostly at night. Not only did it work around my work schedule at the time, but I didn't have to worry about the changing natural light. If the natural light does start to change while you're filming, there's nothing wrong with stopping and starting the next day. You can start working on other stuff, such as scripting a new video or recording lines. Before you even start taking pictures, make sure your camera is set to take pictures at a 16:9 aspect ratio, which most YouTubers use. When it comes to animating, you're going to want to put something in the background, because animation, while incredibly rewarding, can also be extremely tedious, especially when it goes down the packs of Balrog 321, Mason Smox, and allegedly Creepy BioTube Stalker, who animate frame by frame. I don't have a lot of experience animating frame by frame, so if you want to look into that, I would recommend asking people like them about it or doing your own research. Even if you don't animate frame by frame, I would try to add in as much movement as you can. If you watch a video of mine from my first few years of BioTube to now, you may notice that back then, my characters tend to be more static and jagged. Nowadays, I recognize that having your characters move, even if it's ever so slightly, can help them feel more alive and keep your audience engaged. This can be harder than you think though. Let me give you an example. Anime tends to have a lot of scenes of characters just standing around and talking, as to save their budgets for more frantic action scenes, so many times, the animation will stick to mouth flaps and eye blinks with the occasional gesture. Most toys don't have a moving mouth though, so you'll want to find alternative methods. The most common methods I use are head tilts, moving the arms and hands, and occasional body tilts. If you try adding other stuff like moving ears and fingers, like with my Mox, Renoa, and Renala, that adds so many more possibilities for movement and expressions. A common rule I try to follow is to not have a single picture on screen for longer than 3 seconds. Sometimes I may misjudge and an image will remain on there for longer, but this is something I try to avoid when possible. When animating a single movement, I personally find 4 to 5 pictures to be the best minimum. 1 for the starting position, 2 or more for the action itself, and the final 1 for the ending position. The starting and ending positions are known as keyframes, just for future reference. To make for smoother animation, I believe in moving the figure in small increments. For example, here's a movement using several pictures, and here's the same movement with 4 pictures. Now, if you want to imitate faster movements, then I can understand using fewer pictures. Also, sometimes more jagged animation can help give the feeling that something is unnatural. It really all comes down to what you want to achieve. I figure you all want to hear about how to do fight scenes, so...
No. Leave this to the experts. I'm going to break down this 2-second clip and give you 3 tips on how to improve your fight scenes. The first and easiest thing is to bend the legs. It's a ridiculously simple thing, but you'd be surprised at how important this is. Bending the Mock's legs lowers the center of gravity, allowing for better balancing and more dynamic movement. I have seen a truly surprising number of fight scenes, especially in older BioTube videos, where I see the Mock's legs not bend or move at all, which leads to stiff, clunky movements. Second are what I like to call impact frames. There are 4 to 6 frames of motion I add immediately after a punch or a kick lands of the Mocks pushing into each other. I will also add extra frames even if an attack misses. Impact frames are what give blows a sense of weight and force. By showing that a move doesn't lose momentum the exact instant it connects, you visually demonstrate that these Mocks are putting real power into their attacks. Third, cheat the camera. For fancier moves like kicks or any motion that takes your Mock off balance, there's a high risk of them falling over. Well, if you have the camera set up so that any part of them is out of frame, like their arm or their foot, don't be afraid to hold onto it to stabilize them. As long as your hand isn't in the frame to ruin the immersion, do whatever you have to do to get the action looking right. I can guarantee you I use all 3 of these in every fight scene I make. Back to you, Shade.
Thanks? Now, where was I? Oh, right! Now here's where having a camera with the countdown really helps. Press the button and get out of the way, including making sure you don't cast any shadows. Without a countdown, you run the risk of those things. This next tip is something I need to follow more myself, but check every picture you take. Sometimes something goes up with the lighting, a hand accidentally got in the way, etc. Delete that picture and make a new one to make up for it. On a side note, there are stop motion programs we can directly upload your photos to, like Drag and Frame, though that one is costly. I don't have experience with these programs, but the option is there for you. Next, how about doing the vocals? Some people may prefer to do this before animating, which is perfectly fine. Before you start, make sure that the microphone you're using is plugged in and selected. A few times I've recorded something without even realizing that the built-in mic was selected instead. I do recommend turning the recording volume down to about 0.25 or 0.30. If you're trying to have moments in dialogue where you're louder, having the recording volume too high may result in it becoming garbled. For example, try this! And not this! You can adjust the volume later. Now, one thing you want to avoid when recording is background noise. There's more obvious things that will make a lot of loud noise, such as motorcycles, lawnmowers, pets, among other things. If that happens, wait for a bit until they stop making noise and then do the line. However, the less noticeable sounds are less easy to deal with. Sounds tend to bounce around, which can make your audio sound off. There are ways to fix this though. You can buy acoustic panels, but if you can't afford that, record your lines in something like your closet or put a blanket over yourself. That will help trap the sound. This is something I have trouble being consistent with, but please, take time with your vocals. Have at least 2 or 3 takes for each line, preferably with some form of variation between each take, and allow there to be a bit of a break between each line so it doesn't sound like you're rushing through them. Going too fast also makes it easier to flub up a line. I say that from experience. Too much experience, in fact. Also, feel free to take breaks, especially if you're recording for longer videos. Voice acting can be taxing on your throat, so you may need time to recover your voice. Also, have a glass of water by your side. Not soda, not juice, not beer, water. It helps wet your throat and makes doing a lot of vocals easier, especially for long recording sessions. One thing I recommend is recording your audio in batches. Not only do I find the breaks between batches relaxing on your throat, but I think it's better to organize, whether it's by character or scene. If you really wanted, you could have each line be its own audio file, but I'll leave that up to you. Another side note, if you have a character or a scene where someone shouts a lot, save those for last. If you try doing that first and do other voices without a decent break in between, your straightened voice will be very apparent. Recording your audio isn't the end of it though. Now you gotta listen through it. These next few tips will come from someone who uses Audacity, so I'm not quite sure what differences there would be for other audio recording software, but regardless. There are 3 things you want to consider when listening through: background noise, bad takes, and consistent audio levels. I'll go through the steps on how I go through these audio clips to give a clearer understanding. First, try to find a place where there's some form of background noise. I usually check near the end of the video. Highlight it, then go under Effect, select Noise Reduction, and click on Get Noise Profile. That will get a sample of the background audio. Then select the whole recording, and then go back to Noise Reduction, but this time hit the OK button instead. Now that should remove a good chunk of the background noise. Now listen through the audio and remove any takes that you don't think are good. These can include takes with the wrong inflection, words said incorrectly, allow background noise getting in the way, etc. If you come across any other background noises, you can remove those too, either by deleting it or by going to Effect, Amplify, and setting the audio level of that segment to -50. After that, select the whole thing, go to Effect, Compressor, and set everything to these specifications. This will make sure your audio level is more even throughout. You may have other methods of cleaning up your audio, but that's what I do. There's a few other things to keep in mind with your audio. First, if you find your audio too soft, you can use Amplifier to make it louder. I do recommend you make your audio level a bit lower than the max volume offered to avoid your audio becoming garbled. Second is adding vocal effects. If you're doing multiple voices, this can be a really good way to help differentiate your characters, especially if you don't have the best vocal range. Of course, I recommend you try to increase your vocal range, but think of this as an extra spice to your vocal dish. The 2 basic effects I use is change pitch to make my voice lighter or deeper, and an echo to add that demonic flash. Now, if you're looking for something specific, you may want to do some digging online. Go nuts and experiment, see what you can do. Chances are that you're going to want background music and or sound effects for your video. There are websites where you can buy these things, or in some cases, download them for free, but the common method I use is using a video downloader and selecting the option to download an audio version. Some of these websites can contain bugs and viruses though, so please be careful. Word of warning though, if you try to make money off of your stop motion videos, keep away from copyrighted music. Video game music, and music made by musicians like MacLeod are a good choice. Before we move on, a brief mention to green screen effects. Like the audio, you got 2 options: buy them online or find YouTube clips and download them with the previously mentioned websites. Now comes your photo editor. If you want big cartoonish eyes or even paint your own special effects, this is the way to go. I won't go into the nitty-gritty on how to do specific effects and most of the various tools used here, as we'd be here all day, but I will bring up what layers are, as they are important to both photo editors and video editors. For those uninitiated, layers allow you to put multiple bits of audio and visuals on top of each other. With that much power comes with a lot of responsibility, and as my friend Mega X can attest, not everybody has it. Here's a useful tip to keep in mind when making your effects. If you paint your effect like, let's say these eyes, and remove the initial background image, you can save your effect as a transparent PNG. This is extremely useful if you want your effect to be in multiple pictures, but you don't want to paint into every one. You can technically copy the image and paste it into another, but it makes trying to keep the image in one place that much more difficult. Here's what this clip would look like with the same transparent PNG on the same layer. Your imaging editing software is also where you'd be making thumbnails. You don't need them, but I find they add a level of professionalism to your videos when compared to just choosing one of the 3 images YouTube randomly gives you while uploading. Also, while it's not necessary, it's also worth considering the brand of your thumbnails. What I mean by that is, look at some of your favorite YouTubers. What are some of the recurring elements in the thumbnails? Do they have a specific template, common colors, things that make you think, without even looking at the video's name or the channel it's on? Oh hey, it's a video made by channel X! Emperor Lemon has a good video about eye-catching thumbnails, so if you want some inspiration, I'll link his video in the description. Do remember that when making a new thumbnail size, the file must be 1280 by 720 pixels. Once you finally have everything together, you can open up your video editor. Talking about this part is going to be more general, as different editors have different methods, but a lot of the same things should apply. First thing you want to do is make sure your video is at a 16:9 aspect ratio, unless you're making the aspect ratio different on purpose, such as if you're trying to evoke a specific era of filmmaking. The method to do so depends on your editor, so be sure to look that up or do some fiddling yourself. Many editors will have a specific section to store everything, from pictures to green screen effects to audio and more. I believe the best thing you can do next is to select all of your pictures and drag them out into the video timeline. At some point while editing, you are going to have to set your pictures to various lengths to whatever storyline and or audio you have. Here's a method I personally find to be the most time effective. First, select all the pictures at once and set them to the lowest possible length your editor will allow. If you want your animation to be at a specific frame rate, you may want to set the length of your pictures to something else. For videos like mine, and hopefully yours, there should be more animation frames and keyframes. As to those keyframes, now you want to find them and set them to whatever length you want. This isn't really the part where you're matching the visuals of the audio, but more so you know where these keyframes are to help time things better. I mean, look what I have here. It's much more visibly easier to tell which bits I'll have to be moving around in the future. Once you have all that set up, now you can start laying out your audio. After placing your audio on the timeline, if your editor will allow it, or should, turn up the audio levels of the specific file to as high as it can go to make sure your audience can hear it. The only exception I give is if it becomes an incomprehensible mess. Matching your audio with your visuals is where a lot of your editing time is going to go. One tip I recommend is to create cuts in your audio where you want your keyframes to end. That should save a bit more time when trying to fiddle with how long you want your keyframes on screen. It's a good idea to watch the segment you've just edited for each line to make sure the animation flows well. Make the necessary tweaks when possible. While we're still discussing audio, I'll briefly touch on background music and sound effects. No matter what, you want to make sure that your vocals can still be heard. So the audio levels of your vocals should be the highest, and the levels of your background music should be the lowest. I personally recommend -15 and lower, with your sound effects being somewhere in the middle. I find the best way to judge how low your background music should be is to listen to the loudest part of your audio, and listen to how difficult it is to hear the speaking parts. If it's too hard, then turn the audio levels of your music lower. There are too many options regarding the tools in your video editor to get into, but here's a lightning round of common elements to consider. This is arguably one of the most useful tools. At any point, you can change the settings of a clip, picture, or piece of audio and have it change over time. For example, you can keyframe a picture's transparency to make a fading effect. Same with the audio level of background music. I use keyframing all the time when moving my avatar, and heck, this can be seen at the forefront of my mock videos. The effectiveness of your green screen effects likely depend on the quality of your editor. For example, Premiere Elements, the program I use, has it, but you can buy Adobe After Effects if you want better results. As for other tools, take a look around and test them out for yourself. You'll find a lot of stuff that will potentially be useful. Once you have finished editing your video, look over again to see if you can find other errors and adjust accordingly. After that, if your editor allows it, render it and then export it as a video file. Try to make it the highest video quality can be, at least 1080p. After exports, I recommend watching the video one more time to see if any rendering issues occurred or if you found more errors. Before we end things, here are a few other things to consider. Some video and photo editors have filters that you can use to add special effects. For example, when I made this clip in my Bionicle Stopmotion 5 a few years back, I used a filter called Old Film. If you have a program, chances are you can download some add-ons that will offer more options. These can include text fonts, filters, and more. Some of these can be free while others may cost a bit of money, but if you really want them and can afford it, I say go for it. This was something I discovered rather recently, but if you want similar effects and edits throughout your project, or even multiple projects, you can save it as a preset. This will save you a lot of time when you're editing, and honestly I wish I knew about it sooner. Sure, you may want your text to be nice and flashy, but the more important thing to consider is how easy it is to read. For example, going back to my older work, my text was red, but given how some of my characters were also red, it can make my text really hard to read sometimes. You may be able to read it yourself, but that's likely only because you know your script. Your audience won't. Same goes with a font. It's one thing if it's something like a thumbnail title and you're trying to make it funky, but for regular speaking text, you want something more simple. They might seem boring in comparison, but trust me, if you need to sacrifice style for functionality, do it. It's better in the long run. There are a few other things to consider regarding making your text more visible. You can add borders and other effects such as drop shadows, bevel, and glow. The best advice I can give is test and fiddle with your text. See what fonts, colors, and effects work best for you. Between the background music you may have used and the green screen effects you may have downloaded, chances are you've used various assets that aren't yours. This isn't required, especially if you're not monetizing your work, but I just find it to be curious. Even a simple line like, all audio and visuals belong to their respective owners will work. I usually write any credits I want to give in the video description, though you can also do it in the video itself if you want. Whew, that was a lot. And yet there's still more I can cover, but that's pretty much the basics, if you could even call it this point. If you want more resources on how to do a specific thing and how a specific program works, you have the whole internet at your fingertips. The best way you can learn is by doing, practicing, finding new tools, shortcuts, and techniques. Everything I've explained is just my perspective. Well, true if you count Mac's interruption. I encourage you all to get advice from others. Heck, if you have any of your own filmmaking tips, please feel free to comment below. Perhaps even I could learn a thing or two. If any of you have any other questions, I'll try to help you out the best I can. With all the way, thanks again for sticking around, and Godspeed.